Okay, I know most of the people in here. It's nice to be here. I want to apologize to a lot of you right off the bat. Haven't been a very good Rotarian the last couple of years, and I like to start off with that. As when I lost my daughter 3 years ago, I got to the only thing I was good for was going to work and taking care of grandkids, and I kind of lost my vision of being a part of the civic scene, and so I just want to get that off the plate right off the bat. Let y'all know I appreciate y'all, and if I haven't been here, it's not because of y'all. It's just I haven't been where I need to be. But I'm back, and I'm ready to speak with y'all, and I'm feeling good. Okay. So, since a lot of you know me, I can't tell all these stories. So I don't know what Harry thinks, but I can't go there. Okay, man. There are limits to what a man can talk about. Yeah, you might be in one of them. So, but I like to start off with a synopsis of who I am. I was born here in Suffolk, Virginia. Parents Helen and Ned Ferguson. 3 siblings, Gail and Phil and Lydia. Little fun fact, I was born the first year Oversea Hospital was in function, 1951. So I was one of the earlier babies born in that hospital. And I like to just take a second. All my parents, they were my mother came from we'll call it the right side of the tracks up in Maryland. She kind of grew up private school and off to boarding school that. And my dad grew up over on Cedar Street. He didn't have it quite as easy as my mother did. But he went to William and Mary and went to law school, went on to the Navy and fought in World War II as a lieutenant commander. Came back and met my mother up on the Eastern Shore after the war. And they got married. A little fun story on my parents. So my mother grew up with horses. I'll never forget it. And she had they had stables and all that kind of stuff. And so my grandfather went over to my father as they were getting ready to leave to come to Virginia, so he'd open his law practice and said, "Well, Ned, you've got Helen, but where you keeping her horses?" And my father goes, "Mr. Phillips, I married your daughter, not her horses." And my mother's horses' days were over because he had enough sense to know he couldn't afford a horse. He knew what a horse cost, and he wasn't bringing horses to Virginia with him. So, and I got really 3 wonderful siblings. Gail, as you all know, nothing else to be said about her. And you may not know my little sister Lydia, but she spent her whole life as a kindergarten teacher, most of it down at Nag's Head. She's retired now and lives at Nag's Head with her husband. She has 2 beautiful children. And then there's my brother Phil that everybody knows, and he's a story in and of himself. And I'll probably have a couple stories to tell about my family that I'll have Phil in there. But in case you don't know, he was a Commonwealth's attorney in Suffolk. It was the only job he ever had. So he got out of law school, ran against his boss, won, and just stayed Commonwealth's attorney for, 40 years, I guess, at least. So he did that a long time. But growing up in Suffolk was fun. I'll talk briefly about it. But I grew up here, went to, and I'm going to get into some stories, but just for the chronology, I grew up, we lived in Lakeside. I went to John Randolph School, then moved over to Thomas Jefferson School, and then moved over to Suffolk High School. So it wasn't 3 schools the whole time I was here. I went to 3 schools. When I left Suffolk High School, went on to East Carolina, then William and Mary Law School, and I got married. Then I'm here today, 45 years later. But there's a lot of weeds in between in there, and we can have a little fun talking about some weeds, such as what was it like growing up in Suffolk from a guy's perspective back in the 50s and early 60s. I call it the biggest thing I remember is the freedom we had. We had this freedom where I'd leave the house, get on my bicycle. I'm talking about when I was in kindergarten or 1st grade, and drive around, ride my bike across town to go visit a friend, get in some trouble. Ride our bicycles to school, ride our bicycles to the tennis courts in the summertime. So it was a little bit different society. The parents kind of just let the kids go, and if I was at home in the middle of the day and it wasn't raining, my mother wanted to know what was wrong with me. And that was that was a general attitude of the way kids were raised back then. Parents generally didn't ask me a whole lot about where I'd been as long as I was home for dinner. What I'd done in the meantime really didn't matter. They just expected I was doing something that was constructive. They might, well, you can't always live up to expectations. Let's don't carry this conversation too far.
That's probably the biggest joke you're going to tell me.
I hope you're right, George. But in Riverview was we moved over to Riverview when I was in the first grade, and it was a great life for a child over there at that time. We had friends all over the neighborhood, and one of the things I remember is, as a child, this building we sit on right here used to be the midget football practice field for the Riverview Kingsborough football team. This is where we practiced back in the early 60s, and so this was here, and back then, I don't know if not all of you from Suffolk, but we had, the little core city of Suffolk had 5 little, we'll call breakups for the sports teams, and we were segregated, so it was all, the blacks did their thing, the whites did their, it was, we were back in segregation days, but the teams in our league, we had Riverview, little core over here, we had Lakeside over on the other side, we had Central, which runs about from Broad Street all the way over to some say Saratoga Street. Then we had Joyner, which is over by Joyner Park over on the far side, and Hall Place on the other side of the railroad tracks. And they were then we had 5 teams, and we competed in sports, and we had a good time. But we had some attitudes were different back then. And our little football team, I'll never forget the day that I walked across that field. That's where my office is now, with my buddy Hunter Hazlett to go to football practice. And our coach was, we'll call a gifted athlete. He was 10 years older than I was. Gifted athlete who was just a little bit crazy. And he was our football coach. His name was Ray Nile. And I'll just never forget some of these memories you have of they're usually funny, but they also bit at the time. I remember we came out here, and Hunter, and I walked over, and we always did laps before practice. And Hunter did his laps, and he starts going like this. His stomach's hurting him. And Ray now goes, "What's the matter with you, Hazlett?" "Well, my stomach's churning up on me, Coach." "Did you eat something before you came to practice, Hazlett?" "No, sir, I didn't eat anything before practice." "Did you drink anything?" "Oh, yes, sir, I drank some milk." "You drank milk before football practice?" "Look, guys, we're going to get some milk today. Line up, everybody's going to tackle Hazlett and put your shoulder into his stomach." I'm dead serious. It's some things you just don't forget, and Coach got what he wanted. He got what he wanted. Those are the things you remember, because as a society, we don't do those things anymore. We just don't do those things anymore. You get in a lot of trouble when you do those kinds of things. You really do. I remember a story from high school that I kind of like it because it tells a little bit about my mother. She was really, I had good parents. I love my mother, and this is kind of a story. Bill Peachy told me the story, and he told it to me at church, so I know it's true. Okay, and Harry might have been there. He probably was, but the point of the story is about my mother rather than my brother, even though he's the brunt of it. So Phil's over there swooning with his girlfriend, his wife now, Cindy, after school, and he's late for tennis practice. So Phil gets to tennis practice late, and Peachy says, "Phil, you're late for tennis. I need 5 laps." "I'm not running 5 laps. They're the rules, Phil. You got to run 5 laps." Phil goes, "Well, I'm not running 5 laps." So Peachy said, "Well, you just go on home, and you're not playing in tomorrow's match." So Phil got in his car, and he drove home. About 15 minutes later, he's back, but my mother's with him, and she goes, "He'll run the laps." You were there, weren't you, Harry? Yeah, Harry was there, but we spent a lot of time on the tennis courts back then. Harry and I, it was a big deal in Suffolk, For those of you who aren't from Suffolk, Suffolk had terrific tennis programs back in the late 50s and early 60s, courtesy of Howard Mast, and then Bill Peachy taking over the high school teams. And I played a lot, traveled around the state playing in tennis tournaments in the summertime. So rather than going to the swimming pool and learning how to use a diving board, I played tennis all the time in the summertime. And it was fun. I met a lot of people, got a lot of friends, and was able to play high school tennis, played on a team with Harry, and we had a good darn tennis team. I tell people that if you need to be pretty good at something. It doesn't matter what it is, but have something you can fall back on. Whether it doesn't matter what it is, just try to be really good at something. And I always had confidence that I was a pretty good tennis player, and I carried that with me. Whether I was a violin player or whether I was a gymnast, it wouldn't have mattered. I just knew that I could do something pretty well, and that kind of carried me through those days. Suffolk High School was an interesting place to go because we had Art Jones as a principal. He was a very interesting character. He played professional football. Then he came here, and he was kind of rough around the edges and used to get in his way and kind of a bully in his own sense. But Art, I'll never forget Art. One day I had my car. I had a wrecked up car that I drove. Back then students didn't drive nice cars. They drove whatever they could. Mine had a couple of dents in it. It was kind of beat up. And Art goes up and says, "Ferguson, you need to come to the office." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I saw that car leaving here in the middle of the day the other day. Why weren't you here at school?" I said, "You saw that car?" He said, "That red wreck you're driving. I saw it leave early. Where were you going?" And I'll never forget Art Jones. We had some of these stories were kind of outrageous, but another memory I have of Suffolk High School is I didn't like algebra. I just didn't like algebra. So I ended up in Algebra 2 summer school. And as you'd expect, we had a very good teacher. He was kind of a nerd, like you'd expect an Algebra 2 teacher maybe to be. And his name was Hal Pierce. And he was a graduate. He had just come from East Carolina, but he called Art in there one day, and with about 8 of us in the rooms, all that were in the class, and there was spitballs all over the ceiling in the room. We'd sit in there, we'd get boards, and we'd chew paper, and you just flick it up on the ceiling, and the stuff explodes, and there's a spitball. That's kind of what you did back then if you were a guy. And but the bad part is it gets down to what Harry's saying, how the hell I got here. Art walks in, looks at the room, and goes, "Ferguson, come with me." I mean, 8 people in the room. So I kind of had to deal with that, and that's just the way it went. But
reputation, a hard thing to live
it is, it really is. But I do want to say this about tennis. Tennis was good to me in a way, because as I was getting ready to go off to East Carolina, my tennis partner, who had been my doubles partner forever, the only doubles partner I'd ever had just about, Steve Hughes, he wasn't going to college. He said, "Grier, you're going to East Carolina to orientation. Would you mind saying hi to this girl I've been dating some this summer? She's from Chester, Virginia." I said, "Sure, man, I'll check her out. Tell me what she looks like, et cetera, et cetera." So I said hi to her, and we're married today, by the way. I'm looking after my friends. I will tell you right now. I'm looking after my friends. But when college time came up, it was kind of interesting. I tested well, but I knew I wasn't a good student, and so I think my father pulled some strings and got me into William and Mary. And then I got into East Carolina also, and my whole game was go to Daddy went there, Phil went there. It's a family school, and I went over there and I met with those students, and I said to myself, I said, you might be as smart as half these people, might be as smart as half of them, but you're not a good enough student to compete with these people right now. You need to learn how to be a student before you come over here. And so that was, to me, that was probably a really good decision. And so I ended up going to East Carolina, and I had a great time there. I really did. And I didn't go there to party. I did a little bit. I went there I'd done my partying in high school. So these kids are coming in from Eastern North Carolina whose parents never let them out of the house at night. And so they go to school and they go nuts. And I'd already done all that stuff. So I got to college, I was ready to study. And it worked out really well for me that way. It was great for the bell curve, by the way. Great for the bell curve when the others want to drink on Tuesday night and you're trying to study. But I did when I got down there, first day, my mother couldn't take me to college because I was the last son. Phil had already out, and I was the last son out of the house, and she couldn't bear the thought of having her son out of the house. So I had to have a friend take me to college. So I went down to Dwight Darden, my buddy took me to college, and we packed up. We had, whatever you have to carry, a big briefcase, whatever we had, and we had music. And we went to my dorm room, and we took all my stuff and just threw it on the floor, cut the music on in the window in my dorm room, and I was going to have a roommate. I didn't know who he was very well. I had his name, but Darden and I cut the music on, cut on Steppenwolf loud as it could go, and left the room. It was 18-year-old drinking age, when I had a beer at Lums in Greenville, and we came back an hour later, and there's my roommate, and it was my first, learning people from a different part. I had a Eastern Carolina Baptist young boy was my roommate, and here I am. I've got clothes. And his mother's in there. Yes, we put his little underwear over here, and she's packing everything away real nice and neat. And I'm going, this is going to be a really interesting year here. And Doug and I became really good friends, and I totally corrupted him in about a month. But we really did. But when I was at East Carolina, I played tennis down there, and as a matter of fact, the tennis stuck with me. Like I said, have something you're decent at, and it pays. It's good for you. And I just remember my freshman year, I go out to play, and we're playing William and Mary, and they're coming to Greenville, and here comes Cross. And I went, oh my God! And he's playing, and I'm playing 3 at East Carolina, and he's 3 at William and Mary. I got to play Harry. I go, God dang, man, I can't get away from this guy. I got to lose again. Thank you, Harry.
We had a really good match back then.
Yeah, but we know who won.
You reminded me, if you lose today, it might be the worst loss you ever had.
I enjoyed it. Harry was always fun to play. We did have a good time, but there came a time in my college career where I was ready to, I was going to transfer to William and Mary, and then this opportunity came up that I thought was actually kind of cool. East Carolina had developed what it called a European Studies Institute, and they had a mansion rented on the Rhine River at Bonn, and they would send about 36 to 40 students along with faculty and a staff to live in this mansion together and take courses that are all dedicated to European studies, whether it was art, music, political philosophy, everything dealt with Europe one way or the other. And you came out of that program, you'd have a minor in European studies. And I said, that sounds like a good thing to do. And it was really a great year spent in that mansion. It was right on the river. It was a great experience, but we worked hard. We had to write, every time we traveled, we'd have to write a term paper and tie it to the academic books that we're using, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a really good year, but I remember, there are 2 stories I really remember from that year, and I got to share them with you. The first one's completely on me. So here I am, this guy from Suffolk, been in East Carolina for a couple of years. The only place I've ever traveled is New York City. And we're on the bus from Luxembourg to Bonn, and I'm taking pictures, and I'm taking pictures. And one of these buddies that I knew, who later became my best friend and actually went on to be chairman of the Board of Trustees at East Carolina, looked at me. He goes, Ferguson, what in the hell are you taking a picture of? I don't see there's nothing out there but field. And he said, I looked at him like he was stupid or something. And I go, this is what he says. He said, I go, that's Europe, man. That's Europe out there. Like, what do you mean? What am I taking a picture of? So, and that was a great year. And later in that year, we were, I came across a little story there, I guess, living in tight quarters. We had people that took care of our stuff. We had our meals served, and we were on a pretty rigid schedule. But had this one guy that I was very competitive. I tried hard then, I really did, and I was trying to make good grades. And there was this one guy that didn't study as hard as I did, and he was making as good or better grades than me. And he was always down at, we had a Stubchen, which is basically a place to drink beer down in the basement, and he was down there at night a lot. Finally, one day I said, we got a big test coming up tomorrow. You need to just stay up there and study. He said, I'll bet you $5 I'll get a better grade than you do. So I took the bet. I went up and studied. I got a B+. He got an A. I said, what in the hell is going on? I called him. I said, what is the deal here, man? All year long, you've been getting as good a grades or better than me, and you don't study half as much as I do. He said, I got to tell you, Ferguson. He said, I've been having an affair with a chambermaid all year, and this is the last test I took. He had been getting a chambermaid to go into the office and take him all of the tests all year long. You know, and so I just kind of chalked that one up as a lesson in life. You know, life has a lot of experiences, and it was one of those little things I said, I can't believe he just told me that. I'm going to leave it alone, but I think it's a great story because and she was good looking, by the way. So, well, she was. And so then I went on, I did that. That worked out well. Went on to law school. And I really don't have many stories from law school, but I do remember something when I got out of law school. I got out of law school, and my brother called me, and he goes, Grier. I said, yeah. He said, I know you just got out of school, and nice to have you back in Suffolk. And I was learning more about my family and maybe more about being a shrewd lawyer. He says, let's go out to, I'd like to take you to McDonald's for lunch. Let's go to McDonald's. I've got a 2-for-1 coupon on Big Macs. Sure, man, that sounds like a good deal. Let's go. So I'm first in line, and you know, so the girl rings it up, and she goes, she calculates the coupons in. She goes, that'll be $4. I said, Phil, that's $2 a piece. He said, no, I've got the coupons. You pay the $4. All right, I'll see where this conversation's headed. So, nothing like brotherly love. I kind of got a good kick out of it. And Nancy and I have lived in a lot of houses. Kind of cuts a lot of flack about it. I've counted them. We've lived in 7 houses that we own inside the city of Suffolk and 2 that we rented. One from Harry while we were building a house. And so people give me flack about all the houses we lived in. What in the hell's wrong with you? You got an issue or something to that effect? And my only response is, okay, we've had a lot of houses, but I've had one job, one church, up till that time, one dentist, one wife, and I mean, so I felt like, you know, at that point I was good to go with having maybe a lot of something. And so it was just houses. And sometimes people like to, you know, talking back about my parents, I like to talk about the positive things they taught me, but also the funny things. Daddy never really did much that was funny. I'll be candid. He was kind of a serious guy. But one of the things he was, we had a client one time who got in trouble, and Daddy taught me a little bit of wisdom. He said, the client got in trouble. He was a good client, and next thing I know, Daddy's got him another lawyer to handle the case. And I said, what'd you give that? Because I could have handled that case, Daddy. He said, you don't want to handle that case, son. He said, because that client's not going to like the outcome, and he's going to blame his lawyer, and you're going to lose him as a client. And he's exactly right. That's what would have happened. He knew exactly what was going to happen. So that's learning a little wisdom, and he was good at that. He kind of taught me that he always said the measure of a great country is how it takes care of its poor. That kind of always soaked in with me. The measure of a great country is the way it takes care of its poor people. And that's affected me a little bit. So I learned a lot from my years. I don't think I told some of you, but some knew. So when I got out of law school, I came back here and practiced with my dad until he retired. So there was just the 2 of us till Frank and I built that building across the street. And actually that building actually ties in, practicing law ties in with a story that involves my marriage. So Nancy, this is because we get engaged right as I'm getting ready to get out of law school. This is kind of bad, actually. And Nancy comes to me, she says, Grier, you need to get a job. You're getting ready to graduate. And I said, I've already got a job, honey. She said, you do? Where are you going? Where are we going? I said, I'm going to work for my dad. And her little face dropped. And she goes, we're going to live in Suffolk? and I said, if you want to eat. And then she goes, forever? Well, we're still here. And she's still waiting for a pardon. I don't know. So that's kind of the way it works out. I did want to tell a couple of stories about a lawyer, one of my favorite lawyer stories about, and it taught me a lesson about never give a client a blank check. You probably heard that. You don't ever ask an open-ended question. I was a young lawyer. We're up in juvenile court. Blair Harry was a lawyer on the other side, and I actually learned something from it. I'm just sitting in there, and Blair goes up, and he's got this client with him. She's kind of like this. She's all loosey, and Blair goes, "Okay, Sally, tell the judge why you did what you did." And so he just gave a client a blank check, and that girl looked up, and she goes, "Well, you know, I'd been out all night smoking that weed, and when I smokes that weed, I goes crazy." And the judge is some, 65-year-old conservative guy, and he, good golly, that poor Blair, I know he wanted to go hide under the table, but I learned a lesson: don't give a client a blank check and testify it. So Blair taught me that. And the other case that I really enjoyed was I was trying a jury trial one time, and there was a young prosecutor on the other side. The client was a young lady who was charged with embezzling youth league money. She was the treasurer of a youth league, and she was charged with embezzlement. And it was a 2-day trial, and I can't remember every detail, so I apologize to you, but I do remember this. Judge Parker, Westbrook Parker was the judge, and at the time he was young, and he was kind of a good-looking guy. Women liked Westbrook. And the judge goes, y'all excused, the jury's excused right now we're taking a 20-minute break. And out of nowhere, that young prosecutor goes, "And I'd like to get under your robe." Oh, yeah. And every time I see Westbrook now, I ask him how that robe's doing. And I'm telling you, if that had been a female judge and a male lawyer, he'd still be in jail today. And I'm like, where did that come from? It was funny. But, Nancy and I have had a good marriage. I've had a good life here in Suffolk. I've really enjoyed my days in Rotary. This is a great club. I came in 1980 is when I came into the club. And see a lot of faces. I see you back there, Richard. I didn't know you were in here, man. Looking good. I would have told a story on you if I known you were going to be here. Well, Richard's sister was my first little. She was my second grade crush. He had she was a very popular sister. She dumped me by the 3rd grade, but he did. So, so when Paul came up the other week and started talking about Carlsruhe, I was very interested because where I was living was 100 miles up the river from Carlsruhe, and I never visited Carlsruhe, Paul, but maybe that'll give me a reason to go back and check out the Rhine River one more time. Yeah, ein bisschen nur. Yeah. Yeah, I did used to had to speak German when I was there, but it's like any other skill. If you don't use it, you lose it. So that's kind of the way that went.
Well, Bonn was the capital of Germany.
It was, and Bonn was the capital of Germany. We could go on about it. It was a nice place to be. And
Carlsruhe had the federal court, and still does.
Well, I never was invited to the federal court. I can tell you that, thank God. I wasn't forced to go at least. So at this point, I've got, just so you know, I told you I lost my daughter 3 years ago to cancer. Pretty tough time, but she's got 3 beautiful children, and Nancy and I enjoy going to Boone and hanging out with them, and we've got a little apartment in Boone where when we go, we can have our own place with the kids. So that's been a pretty time-consuming part, and my son Brett lives in Carsville. He has 1 child, and then my son Lex, he's a story in and of itself, but he lives in Honolulu, and he has 2 children and a wife, and he's a realtor there. And I actually paid him a little compliment last week. I'll tell this story on him because it's funny actually. So when Brett's growing up, he's a man. My oldest son he's a soldier, And he wasn't doing well in school, and I said, you need to go to Fork Union. So he went to Fork Union, and he fit in like a glove, man. They said, you go make a left turn, he could make a left turn. Make a right turn, he could make a right turn. And he was invited back to be second in command of the middle school for his second year there. He talked me into not making him go back. That was a mistake, but regardless, they loved him. So I'm having Lexington hanging, doing what I felt the teenager should. I said, I'm going to send you a tale to Fork Union now. So I sent him up to Fork Union. He'd been there about 2 or 3 months. And I get a call on the telephone. It's Mr. Ferguson? Yes, sir. It's Colonel Smith, Fork Union Military Academy. Yes, Colonel, how you doing today? I'm going to call you to confirm that Lex Ferguson is in fact Brett Ferguson's brother. We'd like to confirm if whether or not that's true or not. I said, yeah, they're brothers. Well, Mr. Ferguson, I'll have you know that Brett Ferguson was one of the best cadets we've had here, and Lex Ferguson has accumulated more demerits in the course of 3 months than anyone but one other person in the history of Fork Union Military Academy. I said, that's why I sent him, sir. So he said, shortly after that phone call, the beauty of it is my mother came over to our house, and she said, oh, Nancy. My wife's pulling her hair out, and this stuff didn't bother me because I knew the boy would straighten out before life got to the end of it, and he does great now. But my mother said, I wanted to bring you Grier's report cards. So my mother gave my wife all 12 of my report cards, 1st through 12, the complete report cards, deportment, grades, everything. And Nancy opened them up, and she said, oh my God, this explains everything. So, I guess what I'm saying is life comes from a lot of angles. There's the fun side, there's the serious side, there's the sad side, and we all live it together, we share it together. And I want to thank you all for letting me be a part of Rotary, and I look forward to getting active with you all again and being a part of you. Y'all have a great day. Thanks so much.